I was fascinated by the story of this musician who had been so central to musical life in the 1920s and early 1930s in Germany and Austria, whose music had been completely forgotten. Hans Gall is a name I had known for years because he edited the complete works of Johannes Brahms, the editions that almost all conductors work from. And of course, the Brahms symphonies are one of the very first things you start to begin to learn as a young conductor. And you open that score, and on page 1, there's the name Hans Gall. Hans Gall was born in 1890, and this piece, the Fourth Symphony, written in 1972, premiered in 1974. And so this is very much the work of a composer who was wrapping up his life's work, who was conscious of making his final statements in the genres that had always meant the most to him. His first symphony was written in the early 1920s, and he later withdrew it. His first symphony that was published was written in 1927. So this is a long span between the first and fourth Gall symphonies. And so you get the sense here of a musician of great experience, of great wisdom, really summing up and saying goodbye to a genre that had been there with him through his development as a student and through his entire professional career. Critics are trying to assess what's most important to get before the public, there's always a premium put on what we call innovation, on something that's cutting edge. But it becomes a little bit like Fashion Week, you know? We're looking for something that's new and trendy, what's going to catch the zeitgeist of now, as opposed to what's simply the best music. And I think Gall was completely uninterested in catching on to some sort of a pop culture wave in his lifetime. For him, music came from the muse. It came from an inner voice. He could no more have contrived a way to write in another style than he could have flown to the moon. And so his music was at one point in his life incredibly in fashion, at another point incredibly out of fashion. But the quality of it didn't waver at all. And I think now that we've got a little bit of space from the time in which it was written, we can begin to assess it for its originality, for its craftsmanship, for its sincerity, and for what it offers listeners. Gall always sort of wore his ambition as a composer rather lightly. And it's interesting that he was never really driven to try and write for success or write for occasion. But certainly the fact that he wrote his Second Symphony, which is his longest, most dramatic, most requiring the largest orchestra out of any of his symphonic works, at a time during and just after World War II, when there was really no prospect of the work ever getting played. And in fact, when he finished the work, he only started telling his associates about it in drips and drabs, sort of hinting that he had a movement of this or an idea for that. And finally, he sort of admitted, I've written a 47-minute symphony. What are we going to do with it? And I've particularly valued getting to know and talk about the music with Gall's daughter, Eva, who's a fantastic musician herself. And she last year when we played the Third Symphony for the first time, and the piece brought the house down, I said, it must have been absolutely maddening for you that this piece hadn't been played since the 1950s, you know? And she said, well, the first 30 years or so were the most difficult. And I just thought, gosh, the frustration of knowing this music, of knowing the man, knowing what went into the music, and the price that he paid for the music to be written, and knowing that it was sitting on a shelf all these years because no one had the initiative to open the score and see what was in there, must have just about driven her crazy. So it's been very exciting to get to work with the family and to get to record these pieces in a way that brings them into the concert hall.